Since a lot of people have been trying to highball Dragon Ball to 5-dimensional and Outerversal recently, I'm going to be debunking misconceptions and Greek arguments that anyone with a brain and 5 minutes of research can debunk for themselves, although I will also include things other than dimensionality. The hyperbolic time chamber is not infinite, nor is it as big as the universe. It's been directly stated to be only about as big as the Earth. And that's in story. It was only ever called a universe in a fan translation, the official translation only calls it a dimension, and even if it was called a universe, that doesn't speak for its size. The dead zone is not 5-dimensional. A hyperspace can refer to any dimension that is higher than a 3-dimensional space. The Mortal universe is based on our universe, therefore it's only 4-dimensional. The afterlife is not 5-dimensional or above. The afterlife being said to be beyond the living world and being above it refers to how it's located above it, which is consistent with the essential saying that the universe is located beneath the afterlife. It's talking where they're physically located, not that the afterlife is 5-dimensional. People use a non-canon board game that says that Afterlife is a higher dimension and claim it's valid because it's licensed, but that's not how canons work. Being licensed does not mean that something is canon. Many licensed works are rendered as non-canon. The same board game has completely different power levels and multipliers and therefore is vastly different from the show. It has no relevance to the manga, to the anime, to the video games, or any other Dragon Ball continuity for that matter. The board game even makes the claim that King Koyama and his desk are bigger than the solar system, which is not true whatsoever in the show or any other Dragon Ball continuity. On top of this, in this board game, the universe is basically the Kaioshin realm, and Hell is the universe, so everything is completely different from the show. The lack of time does not make the afterlife beyond the concept of dimensionality and outerversal, which would require it to be beyond infinite dimensional constructs. Lacking a fourth dimension is not proof of anything other than the afterlife being potentially 3-dimensional, considering it's still referred to as a dimension and a cosmos, which means that it has space. That's assuming the afterlife has no time to begin with, as Toriyama has referred to it as a time-space, so there is evidence for both it having time and it not having time. Regardless of which is true, the afterlife would be 3-dimensional or 4-dimensional. Koyama's statements regarding cosmology are irrelevant. I already made a whole video on the topic, so you can go check it out after watching this video, but to give you a summary, on 95% of the tweets that people use, Koyama has been referring to our world and not the Dragon Ball world, and he's explicitly said so. People have simply been strawmanning him and misrepresenting his tweets, and the few times that he is indeed answered with his views on Dragon Ball, they are of no relevance, as Koyama has said that he does not understand Dragon Ball's cosmology, that he doesn't know how Dragon Ball's universe works, and is shown not understanding physics and dimensional concepts on multiple occasions. On top of all this, Koyama has consistently contradicted his answers, therefore he's unreliable, which again he himself has said. He said that his word is not to be taken seriously, his word doesn't matter. The people that try to use his word and his blind opinions on things that he himself has said he doesn't know or understand are just desperate. Koyama knows himself better than some online debaters do, and his word is that he is not a reliable source on this matter. People use a scan of Toriyama saying that the Daisenshu staff is more knowledgeable than he is. That's irrelevant to Koyama, as Koyama is not part of the Daisenshu staff. And even in a parallel universe where Toriyama talks about Koyama here, that still won't change the fact that Koyama has contradicted himself, has shown his lack of knowledge, and has confirmed he's not a reliable source that doesn't understand or know anything about Dragon Ball's cosmology. I also find it hilarious how people try to use Koyama to link Dragon Ball's afterlife to Outerversal. When he said that the afterlife is 3-dimensional, he said that the afterlife is 4-dimensional, he's even said that the afterlife is severely bounded by the concept of dimensions, which means that it's not Outerversal. Their own source, their own unreliable and inconsistent source, confirmed false authority source, is literally debunking the arguments that they make using him, which is nothing short of confirmation bias on their part. The solar system in Dragon Ball is not galaxy level. For starters, the solar system is not a nebula. A nebula is a giant cloud of stardust. A solar system is a system where planets and celestial bodies orbit a star. It can be both. When you look at the space near Earth, we only see a solar system. We don't see any nebula, and we don't see any clouds surrounding the space. So either A, a nebula in Dragon Ball is the equivalent of a solar system in our world, in which case nothing changes and the argument becomes irrelevant. Or B, the Daisenshu is simply wrong. Not only this, but a lot of nebulas are also smaller than a solar system. So even if the solar system in Dragon Ball was somehow a nebula, which it's not, that won't make it galaxy level. A nebula the size of Earth would only weigh a few kilograms, so destroying nebulas is quite a big feat to begin with. The universe is not infinite or endless. Basic physics tell us that a positively curved universe, like the one in Dragon Ball, cannot be truly infinite. It's simply an expanding finite universe. We know that the universe in Dragon Ball has an end and can easily be measured with a calculator in verse, on top of the universe being crossed by spaceships that don't have infinite speed, and even being said to be expanding, which means that its size is finite. All of these factors further show that the universe is not truly infinite. Infinity is a hyperbolic term and should not be taken seriously, and has consistently been used hyperbolically in Dragon Ball. There is no real reliable evidence for the universe being infinite in Dragon Ball, only a bunch of hyperboles that are never demonstrated in the show and get completely contradicted. Similarly, the World to Void is not infinite. That was a mistranslation. The kanji only uses the term eternal, which is not a measurement of size. The World to Void is also not outer-versal, as fucking time-space is not the same as transcending them. Nothing suggests that the World to Void transcends time-space. And even if it did, those are only the first 4 dimensions. It doesn't mean that it also transcends higher dimensions, much like infinite dimensional constructs. The Dragon Ball multiverse in canon only contains 6 timelines, as it's been directly stated. While Xenoverse and Heroes may have more timelines, that's an entirely separate continuity. As for Xenoverse does not have an infinite number of timelines, at least not infinite timelines in the way people describe them. It's directly stated that for every timeline a new scroll is made, and those scrolls are stored in a finite room. It's said that if the number of timelines increases too much, the room will explode, meaning that in the end the number of scrolls is finite, and so is the number of timelines. The word infinity can mean many things. There is the true infinity. This infinity has no end. Then there are the false infinities, as I like to call them. Those infinities can be several things. Finite things that people simply cannot measure, or finite things that constantly grow. In Xenoverse, when characters say that history branches infinitely, or that history can end up taking infinite number of paths and possibilities, and that it's formed by a vast number of countless events, it refers to a false infinity. They're basically saying that it's a finite number that's growing. A finite amount of actions cannot create an infinite amount of timelines. They can only keep producing finite timelines. On top of this, they're referring to possibilities, not actual timelines. If a different action was taken in the past, there would be another future. That's what it means. But that action wasn't taken. Therefore, the hypothetical future is just that, a hypothetical future. For it to become an actual timeline, people like Fu need to travel to the past and change history to split the timeline and create a new one, which proves that those possibilities do not exist unless somebody specifically travels to the past to cause those different actions to be taken and create the timeline where the different possibility happens, meaning that the number of actual timelines that exist is only equal to the number of times somebody has gone to the past and has changed history, which they've only been shown and stated to have done only hundreds to thousands of times if I'm being generous. So the amount of timelines that actually exist is not necessarily an immensely large number, and it's important to note that time patrollers undo new timelines by going to the past and removing any changes the villains have made. In response, the timelines that have split come back together, meaning that all those possible timelines the villains end up creating by changing the past usually end up being undone by the time patrollers. So while the number of timelines can grow, simultaneously the number of timelines is going down as the time patrollers restore history to the way it used to be. Therefore, the amount of timelines is always different depending on how fast the villains create new timelines and how fast the time patrollers remove them. And considering how in the future Trunks arc we have only 6 timelines, this tells us that the number of timelines can be as low as a single digit number. Heaven is not universe-sized outside of the viewer continuity. The statement was only ever made in the viewer, that's not even in Kai. And the Daizenshu file mentions that Heaven is only as wide as the universe in the anime continuity specifically, which means that it does not apply to other continuities such as the manga. There is an argument that a true infinity can still have an edge that people throw around. That's not the case. A true infinity by definition has no end. An edge is an end. A false infinity is the only definition of infinity that can have an edge. That would be a finite space that cannot be measured, or a finite space that's simply ever growing, as we said prior. But at the end of the day, it's still finite. To say that a true infinity, the very concept of which is that it has no end, can have an end, is nothing short or self-contradictory. I've seen people use the Penrose diagram, saying that it proves that a universe that's infinite can have an edge. The Penrose diagram is just a representation of space that captures the relation between 2 points through space-time, treated through conformal infinity, which is an infinity where only the angles are preserved, but not the lengths, or in other words, not a true infinity. It does not prove that a truly infinite universe has an edge whatsoever. That's the very definition of a contradictory statement. And the reason this is so funny is because people use the data book hyperboles and claim that they prove that the Dragon Ball universe has no end and is infinite. Yet once this is debunked, suddenly they switch to a finite definition of infinite to justify that it's still infinite. You can't have it both ways. Either you have to admit that the guide statements are hyperboles, or admit that the definition of infinite used in them is completely meaningless. And that's the thing about the term infinity. It's been misused so much that it's become meaningless. If an infinity can have an end, it's not an actual infinity. It's the very definition of a finite thing. Planet Namek is not larger than stars. It being in a solar system with 3 stars does not mean that they circle around it. It simply means that there is a star that 2 other stars along with Namek orbit. Such solar systems exist in real life. Furthermore, if Namek was so large and massive, its explosion would have created a black hole. But it's directly stated that if Goku and Krillin are revived, there will be nothing there and they will die in the vacuum of space. And we even see the vacuum, which debunks the claim that Namek is larger than stars. It also makes no sense for Namek to be this big, considering the fact that he's been referred to as a small planet. There is also the argument that Namek's explosion destroyed the galaxy in the anime, but that was just an artistic zoom into the explosion. It did not represent the galaxy being destroyed, hence the fragments get larger as they zoom into the explosion. Before the zoom in, the entirety of Namek wasn't even visible, so unless each fragment is somehow larger than Namek now, this is so it was a zoom in. And the fact that no black hole was created supports that the explosion wasn't of a large enough magnitude to destroy a galaxy, considering supernovas alone are strong enough to generate one. Another flaw in this argument is that on top of making the false assumption that the 3 stars orbit Namek, it also tries to assume that average planets in Dragon Ball are larger than stars in our world, as that's the only way that it gets past the fact that Namek has been referred to as a small planet. This falls flat on its face when one can easily pull a 180 and say that the stars around Namek are simply smaller than stars in our world, which is also possible in Dragon Ball, as in the anime we've seen galaxies the size of baseballs. Each of those galaxies is seen containing at least hundreds of stars, which means that each of those stars would be smaller than a millimeter. So even if we were to accept the claim that the stars orbit Namek, it still fails to prove that Namek and average planets in Dragon Ball are massive, when the possibility that the stars are simply extremely small is just as valid in Dragon Ball. I also mentioned that I've seen people being slimy enough to outright lie and use this frame right here to claim that planet Namek has 3 stars orbiting it in the anime, when in reality these are ki blasts from attacks the Saiyan used on planet Vegeta. It's shown in the flashback plan to eradicate the Super Saiyan from the game Raging Blast 2. It depicts the Saiyans invading the Tefo planet, which later becomes planet Vegeta. It's hilarious that people even resort to lying about this to push their own narratives, but what's even more hilarious is that Dragon Ball power scalers nowadays are desperate enough to buy it. Planet Vegeta is not 10 times heavier or bigger than the Earth, at least not as far as we can tell. Having 10 times its surface gravity does not mean that it's bigger or heavier than Earth. Surface gravity is determined by how dense a planet is, and a much smaller and lighter planet than Earth can still have the same 10 times surface gravity. If Earth were to get 10 times more and 10 times lighter, it would have 10 times stronger surface gravity than our current Earth, despite being far inferior and far easier to destroy. And King Kai's planet is a great example from Dragon Ball that showcases this fact. Surface gravity on its own is irrelevant. You need to know either the planet's size or the planet's mass for it to be useful. As far as planet Vegeta goes, there is absolutely no information on its size or mass outside, except maybe for the GT continuity, if we were to find frames that let us compare the Earth to planet Vegeta properly, which I've yet not seen. But even then, that would be relevant to any other continuity outside of GT, as GT has its own rules and scale.